The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be a celebration of global unity, the largest tournament in FIFA history spanning 3 nations across North America. Instead, it has become ground zero for one of the most divisive geopolitical crises in modern sports. When President Trump signed Proclamation 10949 in June 2025, he didn't just implement a travel policy, he fractured the very foundation of international football's most sacred event. Proclamation 10949 represents one of the most sweeping travel restrictions ever imposed during a major international sporting event. The order blocks entry from 12 countries entirely while imposing severe restrictions on 7 others. The affected nations include Iran, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Libya, Algeria, and Venezuela, among others. What makes this particularly devastating for the World Cup is the selective nature of the exemptions. FIFA officials, elite players, and essential tournament staff received immediate clearance to enter the United States. However, the proclamation explicitly excludes the very people who make the World Cup what it is: the fans, supporters, journalists covering their national teams, vendors, local organizers, and even family members of players face either outright bans or visa processing delays exceeding 300 days in some countries. The human impact became immediately apparent. Iranian fans who had purchased tickets months in advance, planned vacations around the tournament, and saved for years to attend found themselves holding worthless pieces of paper. There are no waivers, no appeal processes, and no backdoor diplomatic solutions. The message is stark: if you're not from the right country, you're not welcome, even in the stands. This creates an unprecedented situation in World Cup history. Never before has a host nation systematically excluded entire populations of supporters while simultaneously welcoming their national teams. The Iranian squad will take the field knowing that not a single Iranian citizen can legally enter the United States to cheer them on. The same applies to teams from Sudan, Yemen, and other affected nations. The ripple effects of Proclamation 10949 have sent shockwaves through American cities that invested millions preparing for an international tourism bonanza. Houston, New York City, Atlanta, Miami, and other host locations had spent years building infrastructure, expanding hotel capacity, and coordinating with airlines to handle unprecedented crowds. Hotel chains have begun canceling room blocks that were reserved for international visitors. Major airlines are cutting international routes they had specifically added for World Cup traffic. The hospitality industry, which had hired additional staff and expanded capacity in multiple languages, now faces the prospect of operating at reduced capacity during what should have been their most profitable period in years. Restaurants had prepared menus celebrating the cuisines of participating nations. Fan festivals, designed to showcase the cultures of all 48 World Cup teams, are scaling down operations or cancelling entirely. Some feature events honoring Iranian, Sudanese, and other affected cultures have been quietly removed from promotional materials. The economic impact extends beyond immediate tourism losses. Several host cities have quietly begun withdrawing funding commitments they had made for World Cup preparations. The cost-benefit analysis has fundamentally changed when you remove entire segments of the international market from revenue projections. Perhaps most troubling are reports of National Guard deployment preparations. While officially described as crowd control measures, multiple sources suggest these preparations include deportation readiness protocols. The message is clear: America is preparing to host the world while simultaneously preparing to remove parts of it. The situation facing Iranian football represents the most glaring contradiction of the entire crisis. Iran qualified for the World Cup through months of grueling competition, earning their spot among the world's best teams. Their players, coaches, and official staff will arrive in the United States with full diplomatic clearance and VIP treatment. But their supporters, the people who sang them to victory in qualifying matches, who have followed Iranian football through decades of international isolation, will watch from thousands of miles away. Iranian communities in diaspora cities like Toronto are overwhelmed with requests from fans hoping to catch matches in Canada. But cross-border viewing cannot replicate the experience of being present for your national team's World Cup matches. The human stories emerging from this situation are heartbreaking. Families who had planned generational trips to introduce children to World Cup atmosphere find themselves explaining why they cannot attend despite having tickets and savings. Iranian journalists, who should be documenting their nation's World Cup journey, cannot enter the United States to cover their own team. This extends beyond Iran. Sudanese fans face no practical entry options despite their team's historic World Cup qualification. Yemeni supporters, already dealing with ongoing conflict at home, now face the additional barrier of being excluded from their team's greatest sporting achievement. Algerian fans, despite their nation's strong World Cup tradition, cannot witness their team's matches on American soil. The psychological impact on players cannot be understated. Football is fundamentally about representing your people, carrying the hopes and dreams of your nation onto the world's biggest stage. When those people are explicitly barred from witnessing your performance, the emotional foundation of international competition erodes. The business world's response to Proclamation 10949 has been swift and largely negative, though much of it occurs behind closed doors. Internal memos from major World Cup sponsors have leaked, revealing deep concerns about brand association with what many executives privately call a divided World Cup. Adidas, Coca-Cola, Visa, and Qatar Airways, companies that paid hundreds of millions for World Cup sponsorship rights, now face a crucial decision. These brands built their World Cup marketing strategies around themes of global unity, international friendship, and bringing the world together through sport. Proclamation 10949 directly contradicts these message pillars. Marketing departments are reportedly pulling back from US-focused campaigns and redirecting resources toward Canada and Mexico, where the World Cup atmosphere remains inclusive. Several sponsors have expressed concerns about backlash in the affected regions, which represent significant markets. Iran alone has a population of 85 million people, while the combined affected nations represent hundreds of millions of consumers. The phrase "we don't want to be the face of division" has circulated through multiple corporate communications. According to industry sources, some companies are exploring whether their sponsorship contracts include clauses that would allow them to withdraw or modify their commitments based on host nation policy changes. FIFA's response has been conspicuous in its absence. The organization that positions itself as football's global governing body, committed to using sport to bridge political divides, has remained completely silent on Proclamation 10949. This silence speaks volumes about FIFA's priorities and raises questions about their commitment to the inclusive values they publicly espouse. Human rights organizations have not remained silent. The American Civil Liberties Union and Human Rights Watch are preparing legal challenges, arguing that the selective exclusion of fans while permitting players violates principles of equal treatment and potentially FIFA's own charter requirements for host nations. The 2026 World Cup was conceived as a symbol of North American cooperation, with the United States, Canada, and Mexico jointly hosting the tournament. Proclamation 10949 has shattered this unity, creating a clear division between the inclusive policies of Canada and Mexico and the exclusionary approach of the United States. Canada and Mexico have explicitly stated that all fans are welcome regardless of nationality. Both countries have positioned themselves as alternatives for supporters who cannot enter the United States but still want to experience World Cup atmosphere. This has created an unprecedented situation where co-hosts are essentially competing against each other for the same international audience. The practical effects are already visible. Flight bookings to Toronto, Vancouver, and Mexico City have surged as fans seek alternatives to American venues. Hotel occupancy rates in Canadian and Mexican host cities are climbing while American cities see cancellations. Tourism boards in Canada and Mexico are actively marketing their welcoming policies, effectively using American exclusion as a competitive advantage. Several affected nations, including Iran and Venezuela, have formally requested that FIFA relocate their matches to Canadian or Mexican venues. While FIFA has not publicly responded to these requests, the mere fact that such requests exist highlights the tournament's fundamental breakdown. The diplomatic implications extend far beyond sports. Canada and Mexico are using this crisis to position themselves as more reliable, inclusive partners on the international stage. While the United States builds walls, literally and figuratively, its neighbors are opening doors and reaping both economic and diplomatic benefits. As the 2026 World Cup approaches, fundamental questions about its legacy have already emerged. Can a tournament truly claim to bring the world together when it systematically excludes parts of that world? Does commercial success matter when it comes at the cost of the event's foundational values? The World Cup has always been more than a sporting event. It represents humanity's ability to find common ground through shared passion, to celebrate cultural differences while recognizing universal dreams. When politics determines who can participate in that celebration, the event's meaning fundamentally changes. The economic consequences will be measured in lost revenue, cancelled bookings, and redirected tourist spending, but the cultural and political consequences may prove far more significant. The 2026 World Cup risks becoming remembered not for great goals or dramatic matches, but for the fans who were turned away at the border. This crisis forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about the relationship between sports and politics. Despite frequent claims that sports transcend political boundaries, Proclamation 10949 demonstrates how quickly political decisions can reshape sporting reality. The beautiful game, as football is often called, now faces the question of whether it can remain beautiful when its audience is artificially constrained by governmental decree. The irony is inescapable. America is preparing to host the world while simultaneously refusing to let much of that world through its doors. Whether this contradiction can be resolved before the tournament begins, or whether it will define the 2026 World Cup's permanent legacy, remains to be seen. What is certain is that the tournament will never be the same, and neither will the relationship between international sports and political power.